Well, this world has a place for broken things, and it's called the trash. But let's face it, we live in a society that completely devalues things that are seen as broken. And when it comes to things or people who seem to have passed their prime or usefulness, we simply toss them away. If we are honest, to most of us, broken is usually an indication that we have arrived at the end. But starting tonight, we are going to discover that our view of broken is in fact broken. God sees broken in a completely different way. God has a purpose and a passion for things and people that the world sees as broken. So let's set the stage in this whole brokenness conversation. And it's not too hard to do that right now. You may feel that everything is broken right now with COVID-19 and all that is going on in the world, and you're not wrong. Our quote normal way of life was broken up and disrupted. But journey with me tonight all the way back to the book of Joshua. In the Old Testament, God used a lot of surprising people who had some major character flaws. But this is one of the coolest aspects of the Bible. As God communicates his truth, he seems to be always on the lookout for heroes who are plagued by some level of brokenness. I mean, think about this with me. Moses was a terrified fugitive. Abraham was a liar. Noah was a drunk. And even King David, the man after God's own heart, was an adulterous murderer. I am so thankful that God can use broken people like that, because that means that God can and will also use broken people like you and me. But at the beginning of the book of Joshua, we see one of the biggest shocks in who God could use, a prostitute. And if you remember or don't know, let me set the scene for you. All right, God has recently led the Hebrew nation out of slavery in Egypt, and they have had some obedience issues with him that have resulted in a 40-year road trip throughout the desert. The leadership has just changed hands from Moses to his protege Joshua, and God is about to take his people into the promised land. However, one problem still remains, that this land is currently occupied by an enemy nation. So Joshua first sends a few guys in to get the lay of the land. All right, turn with me to Joshua chapter 2 and we will begin reading. Verse 1 says, Then Joshua secretly sent out 2 spies from the Israelite camp at Acacia Grove. He instructed them, scout out the land on the other side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. So the 2 men set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there that night. But someone told the king of Jericho, Some Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, Bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy out the whole land. Rahab had hidden the 2 men, but she replied, Yes, the men were here earlier, but I didn't know where they were from. They left the town at dusk as the gates were about to close. I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch up with them. Actually, she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them beneath bundles of flax she had laid out. So the king's men went looking for the spies along the road leading to the shallow crossings of the Jordan River. And as soon as the king's men had left, the gate of Jericho was shut. See, Rahab had a chance to sell out God's people, but instead she chose to change her alliance from Jericho to Israel. And she offered the spies shelter and protection. Continue with me in verses 8 through 14. Verse 8 says, Before the spies went to sleep that night, Rahab went up on the roof to talk with them. I know the Lord has given you this land, she told them. We are all afraid of you. Everyone in the land is living in terror. For we have heard how the Lord made a dry path for you through the Red Sea when you left Egypt. And we know what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, whose people you completely destroyed. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things. For the Lord your God is the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family since I have helped you. Give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, you will let me live along with my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all their families. We offer our own lives as a guarantee for your safety, the men agreed. If you don't betray us, we will keep our promise and be kind to you when the Lord gives us the land. Here we see a girl who from the outside looks broken. She is living in sin in a city that despises and opposes the one true God. If we were writing this story, we likely wouldn't see much value in Rahab. We would just toss her aside. Yet God did not count her out. In fact, he allowed her to be a part of his eternal story of grace, as you will see in just a minute. But a few chapters later, we read that God instructed his people to march around Jericho and to collapse her huge walls. And when Joshua led the Hebrew nation into Jericho, he gave the following command about Rahab. Jericho and everything in it must be completely destroyed as an offering to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and the others in her house will be spared, for she protected our spies. I mean, how cool is that? First, isn't it great that we can see how faithful our God is? But he allowed for Rahab to be saved because of her faith in him. And second, isn't it awesome that Rahab not only saved the spies, but she used her house to save the lives of others in Jericho when the walls were coming down? And if you think that's cool, just wait until you see what happened much, much later in the book of Matthew. We read in chapter 1 and verse 5, Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed was the father of Jesse, and we skip down to verse 16. Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Mary gave birth to Jesus, who is called the Messiah. I mean, did you catch that? Rahab ended up being Jesus's great-grandmother. Well, great-grandmother 35 times back, to be exact. But who would have thought that a foreign prostitute would become part of the genealogy of the Messiah, of the Son of God? Well, this simply shows just how passionate God is about broken being the beginning. See, God sees broken as the beginning of our usefulness, not the end. This was true throughout the Old Testament, but the Apostle Paul spoke to this in his letter to the church in Corinth as well. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 7 says, We now have this light shining in our hearts, but we ourselves are like fragile clay jars containing this great treasure. This makes it clear that our great power is from God, not from ourselves. That is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. For our present troubles are small and won't last very long. Yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. So we don't look at the troubles we can see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. So reading that, it begs the question, well, what is a jar of clay? Well, in addition to being a classic Christian crossover band that gained popularity in the 90s, a jar of clay is a terrible, terrible tool. It's a jar made from clay that would be a very cheap container. Right? Picture something you would make in the first week of pottery class, or maybe an old Cool Whip container, and you would be on the right track. Is that a container that you would want to use to secure your treasures? Would you put grandma's pearls in a Cool Whip container? Or would you put your life savings in a goofy piece of pottery? All right, our lives are equated to jars of clay because God chooses to use us for great purposes, despite our broken tendencies. He values us even though we are in no way worthy to carry his glory to the world. And remember, when we see brokenness on the outside, we equate a lack of value to it. But God sees the beauty of broken things and people as a way to distribute his eternal glory. God uses broken people because nothing is too broken for God. Right, this concept is so important because it reveals an incredible truth about God. And this truth is of such importance because it answers so much of the why behind what we see God do throughout all of the scriptures, as well as in our lives today. In our humanness, we see broken as the end of something. But God sees broken as just the beginning of what he wants to do in the lives of his people and the story of his creation. But the question is, though, how will you respond to this truth? If you look back on the past years of your life, are they marked by a belief that nothing is too broken for God? Have you seen yourself as beyond God's reach? Or perhaps you see yourself as lacking any usefulness in God's eyes. Or maybe you wouldn't say that about yourself, but there are other people who you routinely attribute a lack of value to. You see them as broken. The way you think God sees broken may very well inform how you see broken and how you see broken people. But I encourage you to really focus on this concept of broken over the next few weeks. Because again, God uses broken people because nothing is too broken for God.